Now we're going to look at the regulation and secretion of hydrochloric acid, specifically in the lumen of the stomach. All right, so we talked about the stomach. Stomach's main function is its storage and also breaks down material with this specific acid, hydrochloric acid. Now we need to figure out, where do we get this acid? How does it happen? Where does it come from? Well, just like in the red blood cells, in these cell here, this is called the parietal cells, they are, once they are stimulated by some kind of protein. So what were the proteins that we talked about that stimulate parietal cells to produce acid? It was gastrin secreted by G cells, histamine, and acetylcholine. So histamine and acetylcholine, when the parasympathetic nervous system begins to innervate the parietal cells, then you have an excess abundance of this hydrochloric acid. We want to see how this hydrochloric acid is created. So here, just like red blood cells, parietal cells have an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. So carbonic anhydrase, if you remember before, its function is to convert water and carbon dioxide into carbonic acid. So you now have carbonic acid. And if you remember, carbonic acid, if it's in a polar medium like water, it begins to dissociate like a normal acid. So you have this dissociation. You have the separation of a proton with the H and a anion group, which is the bicarbonate. Bicarbonate now is not relevant to this production of hydrochloric acid. However, we have our primary substance now. We have one of our primary protons. Now we need the chlorine group. And where the chlorine comes from is from the outside. So the chlorine, extracellular chlorine, needs to permeate into the parietal cell in order to create hydrochloric acid. So how does it do it? Well, there's these bicarbonate chlorine exchange channels where bicarbonate goes out into the interstitial fluid. So now you have this bicarbonate outside, which eventually permeates into the blood, creating this alkaline wave. And then to maintain the homeostatic electrostatic balance, chlorine comes in. Now we have our chlorine. Chlorine now migrates to the terminal end of the parietal cell. So now we're on the apical side here, in the luminal side. And there are these specific channels that are present, here I'll draw them here for you, that bring the chlorine into the apical side of the stomach. Now, what happens with this hydrogen now, here? The hydrogen now, so let me make this pink so you know just direction. All right, now the hydrogen goes to the terminal end of the parietal cell, and at that region, there is this potassium hydrogen ATPase exchange. So, in order to have this cell bring hydrogen into the lumen in order to create hydrochloric acid, a potassium must re-enter the parietal cell. So this exchange takes place here. So potassium comes into the parietal cell, and hydrogen therefore comes outside of the parietal cell, taking place. So they come back here. So let's keep everything so we just see direction. And so eventually what happens, now you have hydrogen protons, and also you have these chlorine anions that combine to make this hydrochloric acid. So a lot of patients that exhibit either high instances of acid reflux disease or too much acid, or if they're prone to some kind of stomach cancer due to excessive ulcerations, these patients are prescribed this drug, omeprazole. So omeprazole, let's see, where can I write that? Here. Let me see. We can write it, let's write it up here. So omeprazole. So omeprazole, again, there are so many of these, are proton pump inhibitors. So they come in here and they actually inhibit this proton pump. So omeprazole, and there's multiple ones. And so if this patient is prescribed any kind of omeprazole, what do you notice about their stomach acidity? Does it go up or does it go down? So you have an inhibitor of this proton pump. What happens? The acidity goes down. So these quote-unquote antacids are used in order to treat a lot of patients with excessive acid production in their bodies.